Welcome to the screencast of the Dell Lifecycle Controller plugin for Microsoft's System Center Configuration Manager. During this screencast, we will speak for a moment about the features available in the 1.2 release of the product and prerequisites to installation. Then we will provide a demonstration of operating system deployment to a bare metal Dell server. In doing this, we'll show how to create a task sequence that uses the Dell packages embedded on the integrated Dell Remote Access Controller, iDRAC for short. We'll also show how to create a task sequence that uses just the Dell optimized driver packages and loaded into Configuration Manager. We will advertise this task sequence to a collection of servers, modify a winpe boot ISO for no-touch deployment, and from within Configuration Manager, instruct a collection of servers to mount this image and run a task sequence. Let us begin by looking at the features provided by the Dell Lifecycle Controller plugin. There are three main features added in this initial release of the plugin. The first feature is enablement of auto-discovery for new systems into Configuration Manager. Dell 11G servers can ship from the factory pre-configured for auto-discovery. The second feature is the ability to use drivers embedded on the iDRAC when deploying an operating system to a server from Configuration Manager. The third feature is the introduction of PXE-less OS deployment, where systems can boot to a winpe image on a protected network share, eliminating the need for a PXE infrastructure. The Dell Lifecycle Controller plugin installs onto a Microsoft System Center Configuration Manager server and requires that the Dell Server Deployment Pack already be installed. Also, for Discovery and Handshake to work, a DHCP scope option or a DNS server record will need to be in place on the network. If a SKU for auto-discovery is used when ordering the servers, they should be shipped from the factory pre-configured for Discovery and Handshake. All that should need to be done is to connect the servers to the network and power them on. The iDRAC should communicate with the provisioning website automatically. Otherwise, the iDRAC may need to be manually configured for auto-discovery. After a few minutes, we can update the collections and refresh a few times. We should be able to see a new collection called All Dell Lifecycle Controller Servers, along with two new subcollections. These collections are created when the first system is discovered by the Discovery and Handshake process. We should also be able to see the service tag of our newly discovered server. Under Operating System Deployment, we can right-click on Task Sequences and are presented with a bare metal deployment menu option. After selecting this option, a screen is displayed that will help us build out our task sequence. We will want to set the boot order and enter administrative credentials that will be used as part of the overall process, and select the operating system and driver packages to use. When the wizard completes, the task sequence is not complete and will need to be edited. For this first task sequence, we are configuring it to use both the Lifecycle Controller drivers embedded on the iDRAC and fail over to drivers loaded into Configuration Manager if needed. For this task sequence, we are configuring it to use just the drivers loaded into Configuration Manager. When we edit this task sequence, we will also have to add 2 steps to set the boot order to the virtual CD. These steps were automatically added in the previous task sequence where the Lifecycle controller drivers were used. Clicking on a task sequence, we can bring up the advertisement wizard and advertise the task sequence to our collection. We can create a winpe ISO by right-clicking on task sequences or a task sequence item. The winpe ISO does not contain anything specific to a given task sequence. We can right-click on a collection to bring up the Lifecycle Controller Configuration utility. From here, we will modify the Windows PE ISO we created and deploy it to a network share. The process removes the press any key to boot from CD from occurring on the target system for this ISO, and it instructs the winpe to run in unattended mode for touchless deployment. With our task sequence advertised to a collection and a modified winpe ISO, we can deploy an operating system to the servers in the collection. To do this, we launch the configuration utility for our targeted collection and select the Configure and Reboot to winpe task option. Here we can select an advertisement from the drop-down to view its details. The second drop-down will contain a list of drivers that are common across all systems in the collection. If using a task sequence that is configured to load drivers from the Lifecycle controller, we'll need to select the operating system of the driver package to use. Checking the Show All Drivers checkbox will allow you to choose from a list of all the drivers, including those that are not present on some systems. If using this option, deployment to some systems may fail unless your task sequence is configured to use drivers from Configuration Manager on failure. When the advertised task sequence uses only drivers from Configuration Manager, we do not want to check the Expose Drivers from Lifecycle Controller checkbox. On this screen, we select our modified winpe ISO on the network share and enter credentials to access it over the network. The systems in our targeted collection will now mount the network share, boot to the winpe ISO, and launch the task sequence. From the Dell Lifecycle controller team, thank you for choosing Dell.